The restaurant went quiet the second I set the folder down next to my mother's wine glass. 22 years of silence and now a private dining room full of relatives, all of them holding their breath. My mother had just finished telling the table that I'd abandoned the family, that I was hoarding my grandmother's money. My twin sister sat at the far end, too thin, not looking at anyone. My father's jaw was working like he was chewing something he couldn't swallow. I rested 2 fingers on the folder. I didn't open it yet. What I pulled out of that folder is the reason my parents haven't spoken to me since. But to understand how I ended up standing in that room, you have to go back to the night they decided one daughter was enough. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories, where we tell the kind of family stories that stay with you long after the table's been cleared. I'm Charlotte. If a story ever made you feel less alone, drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. Let me tell you who I am before they try to tell you for me. I'm a large animal vet in Morrow Creek, Wisconsin. Population just under 4,000, most of them dairy. I pull calves at 3 in the morning. I've had my arm inside a here up to the shoulder while SLE came sideways through a barn door. So when people ask if confrontation scares me, I have to laugh. Blood doesn't scare me. People who smile while they lie to you. That's different. My husband Sam welds and runs 40 acres we lease from the co-op. We have 2 kids. Mia is 7 and asks why constantly. Eli is 4 and thinks every dog in the county is his. We're not rich. We're rooted. That word matters because for a long time I wasn't rooted anywhere. I built this life with my own 2 hands and a borrowed truck. And I never once asked the people who raised me for the first 12 years to help. They wouldn't have anyway. I'd made my peace with that. Or I thought I had. Then one Tuesday in February, I was washing iodine off my hands at the clinic sink when my phone lit up with an Iowa number. I almost didn't answer. Telemarketers love that area code, but something made me wipe my hands in pickup. There was a pause on the line, a breath I hadn't heard in 2 decades. Then a voice, careful and sweet, the way you'd talk to a horse you weren't sure would bolt. Charlotte. Honey, it's your mother. I set the towel down very slowly. My mother does not call me honey. My mother does not call me at all. I stood in that bright little room smelling of antiseptic and I felt the floor of my whole steady life tilt about 3 degrees. Whatever she wanted, it wasn't me. You don't forget the night your parents give you away. I was 12. It was spring and there was a suitcase by the front door that wasn't mine. Except it was because my clothes were folded inside it. I remember the smell of pot roast nobody was eating. My mother sat me down at the kitchen table with that same careful voice. Charlotte, you're going to go stay with Uncle Raymond for a while. A while. I held on to that word like a railing. I asked how long. My father, reading the paper, didn't look up. We'll see how it goes. My twin sister, Whitney, was upstairs with her tutor. There had been a science fair that month. She'd won state. There were ribbons on the fridge and a new desk lamp for her room and a feeling in that house that the future had finally arrived and it had only enough room in the car for one of us. I didn't cause trouble. I want you to know that I got B's. I drew horses in the margins of my homework. I wasn't a problem child. I just wasn't a prodigy. And in that house, those had become the same thing. Raymond's truck pulled into the driveway around 7. My mother walked me out with her hand light on my shoulder like she was afraid pressing harder would make it real. She kissed the top of my head. She said, "Be good for your uncle." Then she went back inside before the truck even backed out. I watched the kitchen window. The light was warm and yellow. Through it, I could see my mother lift the pot roast off the table and carry it to the trash, scraping the plates, getting on with the evening. A while turned into the rest of my childhood, but at 12, sitting in Raymond's truck with the heater rattling, I still believed they'd come back for me. They didn't. I need you to understand the math of that house because everything that happened later runs on it. My parents had twins, and they decided early that twins were a portfolio. Whitney tested into the gifted program in second grade. I didn't. From that day forward, the resources flowed one direction. Whitney got the tutors, the math camps, the violin. She eventually quit. I got hand-me-downs and a library card. Nobody was cruel about it. Exactly. That's what made it so hard to name. My mother had her own story buried under all of it. She'd been accepted to a doctoral program in chemistry the year she got pregnant with us, and she never went. She talked about it the way some people talk about a war they survived. Whitney was going to be the version of my mother that the world had cheated her out of. And me, I was overhead. I was the part of the budget you trim. My father ran a small machine parts business and thought in terms of return on investment. I heard him say it once through the heating vent the year before they sent me away. My mother had asked quietly whether they were being fair to me. My father's answer came up through the metal ductwork as clear as if he'd been standing in my room. We can only invest in one future, Linda. You spread it thin, you lose them both. I was 11. I lay on the floor with my ear to the vent and learned exactly what I was worth on a spreadsheet. I didn't tell anyone. I just got very, very quiet and very good at not needing things. For years, I thought that vent had told me a secret. It hadn't. It had told me a decision. They'd already made it. The suitcase by the door was just the paperwork catching up to the math. Uncle Raymond was my father's older brother, and the two of them hadn't spoken much in years. Raymond had left the city for Derry, and my father considered that a failure of ambition. So, when Raymond took me in, my parents got to tell themselves I'd landed somewhere lesser, which made it easier to stop thinking about me at all. The farm was 40 minutes outside Marrow Creek, and the first week I cried into a pillow that smelled like a stranger. Raymond and his wife Diane didn't push. Diane just kept setting a third plate at dinner like I'd always been there. The second week, Raymond knocked on my door before dawn and said, "Cows kvang. You can watch or you can sleep." I watched. I held a flashlight while Ahir strained and Raymond talked her through it in a low voice. And when that wet, impossible calf finally slid onto the straw and shook its head, something in my chest came loose that I didn't have a word for yet. Diane taught me that you feed people whether or not they've earned it. Raymond taught me that you show up at 3 o'clock in the morning for things that can't speak for themselves. Neither of them ever once made me feel like overhead. By the end of that first year, I had stopped flinching when someone reached toward me. I made myself a promise out behind the milk house. The kind of fierce, stupid promise a 12-year-old makes. I swore I would never need my parents for anything ever again. I'd build a life so solid they couldn't take a single brick of it. I kept that promise for 22 years. What I didn't plan for was the day they'd come looking. Not to take a brick, but to take the whole house. And the only person who saw it coming was the one relative I thought had forgotten I existed. The work saved me. By 14, I could give a calf an injection without my hands shaking. By 16, I was the one Raymond sent into the barn alone. Animals don't grade you. They don't care if your sister won state. They just need you to be steady and on time, and I could be both. Somewhere in there, I figured out I wanted to be a vet. And once I knew it, I aimed at it like a dog aims at a thrown ball. But the part that still cracks me open is the cards. 3 or 4 times a year, an envelope would show up at the farm addressed in a looping old-fashioned hand. Inside a card and sometimes a folded $10 bill and a few lines that always ended the same way. Thinking of you, love. Grandma. My grandmother Eleanor was my father's mother. And somehow, against the whole tide of that family, she had decided not to forget me. She never said a bad word about my parents in those cards. She didn't have to. The fact of the cards said it for her. While my mother and father were busy pretending I'd evaporated, Eleanor kept a string tied between us, one card at a time. I'd write back about the animals. She'd write back asking their names. When I got into vet school, she sent a card that just said, "Of course you did." I have it still. For a long time, those cards were the only thread connecting me to the family I came from. And I assumed that's all they'd ever be. A kindness from an old woman in a care home 2 towns over. I had no idea she was doing anything more than loving me from a distance. I had no idea she was watching, counting, keeping things in a wooden box. And I had no idea how little time was left to thank her until the morning Diane's number lit up my phone with news about Ella Laner's heart. I want to skip ahead because the good years deserve their own breath. I finished vet school with more debt than sense and came straight back to Morrow Creek because it was the only place that had ever felt like mine. I bought into old Doc Pute's practice when he retired, and then I bought him out entirely. I met Sam at a feed store of all places when his truck wouldn't start and mine had cables. We married in Raymond's back pasture. Diane lived long enough to dance at that wedding. Slow and careful 3 months before the cancer took her. Then came Mia and then Eli and a life that on paper looked small and felt enormous. I had a practice, a husband, 2 kids who climbed me like a tree, and an uncle who'd gone gray and stooped but still came to Sunday dinner. I had everything those people in Iowa had decided I wasn't worth the investment to give. And I never sent them a single update, not a graduation announcement, not a birth notice, not out of spite, out of survival. I had built a house with no doors facing their direction, and I liked it that way. Eleanor knew it all, of course, through her cards. She knew Mia's name and Eli's birthday. The last card she sent that Christmas said, "You did the thing I prayed you'd do. You built something they can't ration." I didn't understand the word ration until later. I thought it was just an old woman's phrasing. Then one Tuesday in February. Yes, that February. The same week as the strange call I told you about. Diane's old number flashed on my screen. Except it wasn't Diane. It was the care home using a number still saved under her name. The nurse's voice was gentle and rehearsed. Eleanor had had a stroke. If I wanted to see her while she could still see me, I should come now. I left the clinic with iodine still on my hands. The care home was 40 minutes the other side of Morrow Creek, and I drove it in 30. Eleanor's room smelled like lavender lotion and floor cleaner. She was small in the bed, smaller than the last time, and the stroke had pulled one side of her face down like wet clay, but her eyes found me, and they sharpened, and her good hand lifted off the blanket toward me. I took it. Her grip was still there, faint, but real. "Charlie," she said. It came out slow and bent, but it was my name, the one only she and Raymond ever used. I told her I was there. I told her not to talk. Save her strength. The useless things you say. She squeezed my hand to make me stop. She had something to get out and not much road left to get it out on. "The box," she said. "Wooden box at the house." I leaned closer. Her care home apartment. She meant the little one she'd kept before this last decline. "There's things in it," she said. Each word cost her things you need to know when I'm gone. "Promise me you'll open it yourself. Don't let your father near it." I promised. I'd have promised her the moon. She looked at me a long moment, and the working half of her mouth pulled into something that wanted to be a smile. "Good," she said. "Now they can't ration you." There was that word again. I asked her what she meant. Her eyes had drifted toward the window, toward the gray February light, and her hand had gone loose in mine. The nurse came in then, checking the monitor, her face shifting into the careful blankness they're trained for. Ella Laner slept after that, and then the sleep got deeper, and 3 days later she was gone. I never got to ask her what was in the box, but I'd promised, and I keep my promises. That's the whole problem with me, really. The funeral was small, the way Eleanor wanted it. A handful of women from her old church, a couple of nurses who'd grown fond of her, Raymond leaning on a cane, me and Sam. My parents didn't come. Whitney didn't come. 22 years of distance, and they couldn't drive 3 hours to bury the woman who'd raised my father. I told myself I wasn't surprised, and I mostly wasn't. What surprised me was Aunt Pam. Pam is my mother's younger sister, 60 years old and built entirely out of opinions about other people's business. She showed up at the funeral home in a good black coat, dabbed at eyes that weren't wet, and within 10 minutes had steered me into a corner by the coffee urn. "Such a loss," she said. She kept to herself at the end, didn't she? Did she ever, get her affairs in order? I just looked at her. Pam plowed on, lowering her voice to the register people use for money. Because there was the house, and Eleanor was always careful with $1. Your mother just wonders who's handling all that as family. There it was. They hadn't come to mourn. They'd sent a scout. I told Pam that the lawyer was handling it, which was true. And I watched the word lawyer land on her like a drop plate. She recovered fast. "Well, I'm sure it'll all be fair," she said in a tone that meant she intended to make sure it was fair to the right people. She squeezed my arm and clicked away on her heels to find better reception for whatever call she was about to make. I stood by the urn with my paper cup and understood something cold and clarifying. My grandmother wasn't even in the ground yet, and the family that had written me off had suddenly remembered my address. The only question left was how much they thought was in the box. The lawyer's name was Marisol Vance, and she had an office above a hardware store in Morrow Creek with a radiator that knocked like it had opinions. She'd been Eleanor's attorney for 15 years, which surprised me. I'd assumed a woman in a care home didn't keep a lawyer on a 15-year retainer. Marisol had reading glasses pushed up into gray hair and the unhurried manner of someone who'd watched a lot of families behave badly over inheritances. She slid a folder across the desk. "Your grandmother was specific," she said. "And she was organized. I want you to understand before we go through any of it that none of this was last minute. Eleanor had left me the bulk of her estate. The care home apartment was nothing. But Eleanor had owned her old house outright, a tidy place she'd rented out for years, plus a savings account she'd fed steadily for 2 decades. The total made my ears ring. It wasn't life-changing money to a banker. To a rural vet with school debt and 2 kids, it was a different sky. But Marisol wasn't done. She set 2 more things on the desk. A sealed letter, my name across the front in that looping hand, and a wooden box, the lid worn smooth. Exactly the box Eleanor had made me promise to open myself. She left instructions. Marisol said that you open the letter and the box alone, and she added a clause. I'll be frank. In 15 years, I've drafted that clause maybe twice. She looked at me over the glasses. A no-contest provision. Anyone who challenges this will and loses forfeits anything they might otherwise have gotten. Your grandmother seemed to expect a challenge. Asked from who? Marisol's expression didn't change. She didn't say, but she told me to make it airtight. And she told me to make sure it went to you and only you. I drove home with a sealed letter on the passenger seat and did not open it. I wanted to be alone, the right kind of alone. When I did, I'd barely set the letter on my kitchen counter when the Iowa number called again. I let it ring twice while I decided who I wanted to be on this call. Then I answered. My mother's voice poured out, warm as syrup and just as sticky. Charlotte, honey, I've been thinking about you so much. Life's too short, isn't it? We saw about your grandmother. God rest her. And it put everything in perspective. I said nothing. Silence makes liars keep talking. Your father and I, we have regrets, she went on. We weren't perfect. Nobody is. But you're our daughter, and we'd love to put the past where it belongs, behind us. She let that sit, then landed the hook so smoothly, I almost admired it. We want to have a family dinner, everyone. You, Whitney, the aunts, a fresh start. Will you come? Now, here's where I want to be honest with you, because I've heard people say they'd have hung up. Maybe you would have, but 22 years is a long time to carry a hole where parents should be. And some animal part of me leaned toward that warmth before my brain caught up. Then I heard it, the timing. My grandmother, 3 weeks dead, an estate freshly mine, and suddenly the perspective, suddenly the fresh start. People don't get sentimental on a schedule, they get sentimental on a deadline. I asked her evenly. What had changed? There was the smallest pause. We're not getting any younger, honey, she said. And family should help family. Help. There was the word under all the syrup. I told her I'd think about it. She said she loved me before she hung up the first time in 22 years, and it landed on me like a coin tossed to a beggar. I stood in my kitchen and looked at Eleanor's sealed letter on the counter, and I thought, whatever's in that box, I'd better read it before I sit at any table they've set. I called Marisol the next morning before I'd even finished my coffee. I told her about the dinner invitation and the sudden flood of motherly love, and she went quiet in the way that means a professional is choosing words carefully. Charlotte, I'm going to tell you what I tell everyone. And then I'm going to tell you the harder thing, the easy part. The estate was legally mine. The no contest clause was solid. And I didn't owe anyone $1 or an explanation. The harder thing, solid doesn't mean painless. If they want to challenge the will, they can file. They'll lose, but they can drag it out months. They can subpoena. They can make noise. They can poison every family relationship you have left while it winds through court. I asked if there was anything I could do to lock it down faster. Marisol said the estate had to go through formal settlement no matter what, and that there was a meeting on the calendar for that. Until then, I should keep records, keep my mouth shut publicly, and not sign anything anyone put in front of me. Especially, she added, don't sign anything at a dinner. I told her I wasn't planning to. People who plan dinners like this, she said, are usually planning more than dinner. I hung up, feeling steadier and worse at the same time. Then my phone buzzed with a text from a number I didn't have saved but recognized in my gut. Whitney, my twin. We hadn't exchanged a word since we were 12. The text was short and didn't sound like the prodigy I remembered. It said, I know this is out of nowhere. Can we talk? Just us, not them. Please. I stared at it a long time. Every instinct said it was part of the same play. Another angle, another scout. But there was a please on the end of it that didn't fit the script. Against my better judgment, I texted back a single line. When we met at a coffee place in a town halfway between us, neutral ground, like a prisoner exchange. I almost didn't recognize her. Whitney had been the golden one, the one with the posture and the certainty. The woman who walked in was hollow-shaped and careful, a coat a season too thin, hands that didn't quite settle. We sat across from each other, two faces that used to be one face, and for a moment neither of us could speak. Then she laughed, a small broken sound, and said, You look like you turned out okay. God, that's a relief. I asked her why she'd reached out. She wrapped both hands around her cup like it was the only warm thing she had. The story came out in pieces. Her startup, some education tech thing our parents had bankrolled and bragged about, had collapsed 18 months ago. There were investors. There were debts she'd personally guaranteed. Her marriage had cracked under it and split clean. I'm 34 and I'm living in our parents' basement, she said, which is its own special hell, let me tell you. I felt something I hadn't expected to feel for her. Not triumph, just the recognition of one tired animal by another. Then she said the thing that changed the temperature of the whole table. I always wondered about you. She said, when we were kids, after you left, I asked Mom once where you went, and she said you'd chosen to live with Uncle Raymond, that you liked it better there, that you didn't want to come home. I set my cup down very carefully. Whitney, I said. I didn't choose anything. I was 12. They packed a suitcase and put me in a truck. She went still. Something moved behind her eyes. Some load-bearing belief shifting on its foundation. That's not what they told me, she whispered. And right then, in a strip mall coffee shop, I realized the lie was bigger and older than I'd ever known. I drove straight from that coffee shop to Eleanor's old house, the rental standing empty between tenants, the key cold in my hand. The wooden box was where Marisol's note said it would be, on the top shelf of the bedroom closet, wrapped in one of Eleanor's good scarves. I carried it to the kitchen table, the same kind of table where my mother had once told me I was going to stay with my uncle for a while. I sat down. I opened Eleanor's letter first because I'd promised and because I needed her voice before I could look at whatever else was in there. Then I lifted the lid of the box. On top were photographs. Me at 6, gap-toothed before any of it. Me and Whitney in matching Easter dresses, indistinguishable, 2 girls before the world started grading them. A few of me as a teenager on the farm that Eleanor must have asked Diane to send her. She had been keeping a record of the granddaughter everyone else discarded. Under the photographs, the temperature of the box changed. There were documents, bank statements, the old kind with the perforated edges, a manila envelope soft with handling, legal pages with a notary stamp. My grandmother, the woman who sent $10 bills and birthday cards, had been quietly assembling something for years. This wasn't sentiment. This was a case file. My hands were steady. I pull calves at 3 a.m., remember? But my heart was doing something complicated. I knew the way, weather is coming before the sky changes, that whatever was on these pages was the thing she'd meant when she said they can't ration you. I squared the stack on the table. I picked up the first bank statement, and I started line by line to learn exactly what my parents had done with the money that was supposed to be mine. But first, the letter. I have it memorized now, though I keep the paper too. Eleanor's handwriting had gone shaky at the end, but the voice was all hers. My dear Charlie, it began. If you're reading this, I'm gone. And I'm finally able to tell you the things I held my tongue about for far too long. I was a coward in one specific way. I watched your parents make their choice, and I told myself it wasn't my place to interfere. I've regretted that quiet every single day. I couldn't undo it. So, I did the next thing. I started keeping what they threw away, including the truth. She wrote that she'd suspected, then confirmed, that my parents hadn't just sent me off. They'd taken something with both hands while they did it. There was money meant for both of you girls, she wrote. Equally, I made sure of that while I could. What they did with your half, you'll find in the box. I got the records the honest way through the bank because I had a right to as a contributor. I'm not leaving you my house and my savings to make you rich, Charlie. I'm leaving them to you so that you will never, not once in your life, have to sit at their table and beg for a seat. You earned your seat the day you were born. They're the ones who forgot. Use the box if they make you. Don't if they don't. Either way, you're free now. Stand up straight. Love. Grandma. I read it 3 times. Then I folded it along the creases she'd made, and I put it back in the envelope, and I sat in that empty kitchen as the afternoon light went long and gold across the floor. My grandmother had spent the last years of her life building me a shield, one bank statement at a time in case the family ever came for me. And now the family was coming. The dinner was set. And she'd handed me from beyond the grave the one thing they never thought I'd have. Proof. If you're listening to this and thinking about the one person in your family who never made you earn their love, pause this and text them. I waited too long with my grandmother. Don't make my mistake. And if this story is hitting close to home, subscribe so the next one finds you, too. Here is what the bank statement said in plain English. Because numbers can hide cruelty, and I won't let them. When Whitney and I were small, there had been an account opened in both our names. The Ingram Children's Education Fund, my grandmother's contribution at the heart of it, fattened over the years by relatives, and a small inheritance from a great-aunt. It was meant to put 2 girls through college. 2. The statements showed steady deposits all the way up until I was about 13. Then, the year after they sent me to Raymond, something changed. Withdrawals started. Big ones, tuition payments, math camps, a violin, a private high school, then a private college. All of it flowing toward one name, Whitney's. My half of that fund, the half with my name on the account, the half meant to make me a vet without a decade of debt, had been drained to the cent by the time I was 17. They hadn't just decided not to spend on me. They'd taken what was already set aside for me and spent it on the daughter they'd chosen. I sat with that for a long while. I thought about the nights I'd lain awake doing the math on vet school loans. The years Sam and I ate beans so we could make a payment. The way I'd told myself it built character. There had been money. It had my name on it. And they'd fed it dollar by dollar into the future they decided was worth funding. I didn't cry and I didn't throw anything. I'm not built that way. Instead, I did what Raymond taught me to do with a hard birth. I got steady. I lined the statements up in order. I noted the dates. I started very quietly to build a case my grandmother had handed me the foundation of. They wanted a dinner. Fine, I'd come to dinner. But I'd come knowing exactly what was already mine and exactly what they'd spent of it. I brought the box to Marisol 2 days later and watched her go through it with the focus of a surgeon. She handled the bank statements by the edges, read the dates, made small notes on a legal pad. When she got to the manila envelope, she opened it, scanned the page inside, and went very still. "Where did your grandmother get this?" she asked. I told her the bank. The honest way. Marisol nodded slowly. "This isn't just unkind, Charlotte. This account had both girls as named beneficiaries, moving the entirety of one beneficiary's share to the other without consent, especially while you were a minor. That's not a family squabble. Depending on how it was structured, that could be a breach, possibly actionable." I asked what that meant in plain terms. "It means," she said, "that if your parents are foolish enough to come after Ella Laner's estate, they'd be doing it while sitting on a much bigger problem of their own. People throwing stones from inside a glass house." She set the page down. "I'm not telling you to sue your parents. That's your call, and it's a heavy one. I'm telling you that you walked in here thinking you had a shield. You actually have a sword, too. The question is whether you ever have to draw it." I told her I didn't want a war. I wanted to be left alone with my family, my real one. Marisol gave me a long look over her glasses. "Then I'd suggest you make it very clear, very publicly, and very calmly that going to war with you is a losing move. People only respect the boundary they can see the wall of." My phone buzzed on her desk. "My mother texting Chipper is anything. So glad you're coming. Saturday the 14th, 6 p.m. The Hollowbrook room. The whole family will be there. Wear something nice." I looked at the message, then at the box, then at Marisol. "She picked the stage," I said. "I'll bring the script." I didn't decide to go to that dinner out of weakness. I want that on the record. I decided to go because of where it was. The Hollowbrook room is a private dining room at the only nice restaurant in Morrow Creek. My town, not theirs. They were driving 3 hours into my territory to perform for an audience of aunts and uncles and cousins. The whole extended clan. My mother had spent decades managing the story for 22 years. That audience had only heard one version of me. The difficult daughter, the one who chose to leave, the ungrateful girl now sitting on grandma's money. If I stayed home, that version won by default. If I went, I had one night, one room, one table full of the only witnesses whose opinion my parents actually cared about. My mother's whole power came from controlling the story in front of those people. So, I'd tell the story in front of those people with the documents on the table in a voice so calm they'd have to lean in to hear me. That's the thing about people who shout. They can't survive someone who doesn't. I spent that week building a folder, not a dramatic stack. Marisol warned me against theater, just the essentials in order. The notarized copy of the document where my parents had voluntarily signed over guardianship, which I'll get to because it undid the lie of my choice, the bank statements showing the drained fund. Eleanor's letter, a copy, the original locked in Marisol's safe. And though I didn't know it yet, one more thing was coming that would make the whole folder land like a verdict. I practiced what I'd say until it was short and true and unshakable. Sam watched me rehearse at the kitchen table one night and said, "Quiet. You sure you want to do this?" I said, "No." Then I said, "Yes." Both were true. Some things you're never sure of. You just know they're yours to do. The one thing I was certain about was the kids. Mia had started asking questions. She's 7 and misses nothing. About the grandparents she'd never met who were suddenly on the phone. I sat her and Eli down and told them the truth in kid-sized pieces. That sometimes grown-ups in a family make bad choices and need time to fix them. That they were loved completely and that nothing happening with the faraway grandparents was about them. Then I made the call I knew was right, even though it cost me something. The kids would not be at that dinner. Whatever happened in the Hollowbrook room, my children would not be in the audience for it. Sam would stay home with them. He didn't like it. He wanted to be in that room beside me. And I loved him for it. But I needed him to be the steady thing the kids came home to. And I needed to walk in alone. Not as a wife, not as a mother, as the 12-year-old who'd watched a kitchen window from a truck. Finally grown. Finally holding the truth. Walking back in on her own 2 feet. Sam pulled me in by the kitchen sink and held on longer than usual. "Whatever you decide to say in there," he said into my hair. "You've already won the part that matters. You've got us." I let myself lean on him for exactly 1 minute. Then I straightened up because Raymond taught me that you can be tired before the work and after the work, but not during it. The dinner was 3 days out. Whitney had texted twice more, nervous, asking if I was still coming, telling me she'd been thinking about what I said in the coffee shop, that some things weren't adding up for her anymore. I told her I'd see her Saturday. I didn't tell her what I was bringing. Some doors you don't open until everyone's in the room. And the next morning, Marisol called with the piece that turned my folder from a shield into something with an edge. Marisol called me into her office that Thursday with a tone I hadn't heard from her before. Careful, almost gentle. "I went looking," she said, "for the guardianship records. When a child goes to live with a relative long-term, there's usually paperwork. I wanted to know what story the paper told." She slid a notarized copy across the desk. It was a voluntary transfer of guardianship dated the spring I was 12, signed by my mother and my father, granting custody of me to Raymond Ingram, not temporary, not emergency, voluntary, and indefinite. Read the line at the bottom. Marisol said there in the section, "For reason in my father's blocky hand, parents unable to allocate adequate resources to both minors, allocate adequate resources." They'd put it in writing to a notary. The lie my mother had told Whitney, that I'd chosen Raymond, that I liked it better, there was demolished by a single sentence my own parents had signed when I was a child. I hadn't chosen anything. They'd filed me away like a form. I folded the notarized copies into my bag. And here's the thing I want you to sit with, because it's the moment the whole story turned. My parents had no idea I had this. They thought the only version of events that existed was the one my mother had spent 22 years telling. They were planning to walk into that dinner and run the same play they'd always run, the difficult daughter story, in front of the same trusting audience. They still thought I had nothing. That was the last advantage they'd ever hand me. From that Thursday on, I knew how Saturday would end. They didn't. And there's a particular kind of patience that settles over you when you're holding the truth and watching someone walk confidently toward the edge of it. I wasn't angry anymore. I was just waiting for the table to be set. There was a clock on all of this, and Marisol made sure I understood it. The estate's formal settlement was scheduled for the 17th, a Tuesday, 3 days after the dinner. On that date, Eleanor's will would be entered. The no contest clause would lock, and everything she'd left me would pass cleanly into my name unless someone had formally challenged it first. "Here's what I need you to know," Marisol said. "Your parents have already had their lawyer make noise, a letter of intent to contest, citing undue influence on an elderly woman." She said it flat, but I caught the edge. They were claiming I'd manipulated a dying woman in a care home, the same woman they couldn't be bothered to bury. "They'll lose." Marisol said Eleanor documented her capacity, her reasons, everything. But here's the timing. They want to settle this their way before the court date. They want you to agree to share to hand Whitney a slice voluntarily so it never gets in front of a judge who'd see exactly what they did with that fund. It clicked into place cold and clean. The dinner wasn't a reconciliation. It was a deadline maneuver. Get me in a room full of family. Apply the pressure of 22 years and 100 watching eyes. And get me to give away what was mine before the law made it permanent and the bank statements made them liable. They had 3 days. So did I. Everything funneled towards Saturday night. The Hollowbrook room, 6 o'clock. Whatever was going to happen had to happen there before the Tuesday that would either protect me forever or hand them an opening. I stopped sleeping well, not from fear, from the particular alertness of an animal that knows the storm's arrival time. I checked the folder every night. Guardianship transfer, bank statements, Eleanor's letter in order, ready, 3 days, then 2, then the thing I hadn't planned for. The family started talking before I ever walked in. Aunt Pam got there first, the way she always does. The phone call started 2 days before the dinner. Not to me, around me. A cousin I hadn't talked to in years called awkward fishing. We just think it's sad as all that Grandma Eleanor cut everyone out but you. Pam says you were always angling for it. Says you swept in at the end. An aunt left a voicemail dripping with concern about how my poor parents had tried so hard to reconnect only to find me cold and money-focused. Pam was running a campaign and the story was simple and sticky. Charlotte abandoned the family. Charlotte manipulated a dying old woman. Charlotte is hoarding what should be shared. It was the oldest trick my mother's side had, and Pam was its loyal foot soldier because Pam had spent her whole life keeping her older sister's image polished. If my mother was a woman who gave away a daughter, then Pam had spent 22 years lying for a monster, and Pam could not afford that to be true. So, she got out ahead of it. She seeded the room before I could enter it. Now, the old me, the not needing anything me, would have called every cousin and defended herself, scrambling, explaining, sounding exactly as guilty as Pam wanted me to sound. I didn't. Marisol's words were in my ear. People only respect the boundary they can see the wall of. You can't argue someone out of a story. You can only show them a truer one all at once in a room they can't look away from. So I let Pam talk. I let the whispers build. Every cousin she poisoned was one more witness who'd be in that room Saturday. Leaning in, primed to hear the worst about me, which meant they'd all be looking right at the table when I set the folder down. Pam thought she was burying me. She was building me an audience. I didn't fight the whisper campaign with noise. I fought it with paper, quietly, the way I do everything. I called the bank that had held the education fund and confirmed in writing that both Whitney and I had been named beneficiaries and that the closing transfers had moved my share to tuition accounts in Whitney's name. I asked Marisol to keep originals locked up and certified copies ready. And I did one more thing, the hardest one. I called Whitney. I told her plainly what I'd found. The fund, the guardianship paper, the reason in our father's handwriting. There was a long silence on the line, the kind that has a person rebuilding their entire childhood inside it. I didn't know, she finally said, and her voice cracked clean down the middle. I swear to God, Charlie, I didn't know about the money. I thought they told me you didn't want. She couldn't finish. I asked her if she'd be willing to simply tell the truth if it came to that, to say what she actually remembered. She was quiet again. They're letting me live in their house, she whispered. I have nothing else right now. I told her I understood. I didn't ask her to promise. You don't make a drowning person carry your weight, too. Then that night, my father called. The first time I'd heard his voice in 22 years. No syrup, not like my mother. Just the flat transactional tone I remembered from the heating vent. Charlotte, we need this dinner to go smoothly. Your sister's in a hard spot, and family helps family. You've done well for yourself. Your grandmother saw to that. It's time to be reasonable about sharing what's frankly more than your share. I said nothing for a moment. Then he said the thing that told me he hadn't changed one atom in 2 decades. We can only invest in one future. You understood that, then understand it now. We can only invest in one future. He said it like a proverb, like wisdom, like the most reasonable thing in the world. The same sentence I'd heard come up through a heating vent when I was 11 years old, lying on my bedroom floor, learning my own price. 23 years later, he hadn't even updated the line. That's the thing about people like my father. They don't think they did anything wrong, so they never bothered to hide the evidence. He just handed me freely over the phone the exact philosophy that had governed throwing away a child. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. And I didn't give him the fight he was braced for. I just said, "I heard you, Dad. I'll see you Saturday." And I hung up and I sat in my dark kitchen and I felt something settle into place that I'd been waiting my whole life to feel. It wasn't rage. Rage burns out. This was colder and far more useful. It was certainty. For 22 years, I'd carried a small, gnawing question, the one every discarded kid carries. Was it me? Was there something wrong with me? Something that made me unkeepable? That phone call killed the question dead? There was nothing wrong with me. There was something wrong with the spreadsheet they'd run my childhood on and the man who still 2 decades later thought it balanced. I looked at the folder on the counter. Guardianship transfer, bank statements, Eleanor's letter. I added one more page that night, a printout of what I planned to say, kept deliberately short so I wouldn't reach for more. Raymond always said, "The cleanest cut is the one you don't saw at." I'd say my piece, lay down my proof, and let the room do the rest. 2 days I went to bed, and for the first time that week, slept like the dead. Some part of me knew the waiting was nearly over. Whitney called me the night before the dinner late, her voice low, like she was hiding in that basement so our parents wouldn't hear. "I can't stop thinking about it," she said. "Since you told me, I've been going through everything I remember, and it's all coming apart." She told me a memory I'd never had access to because I hadn't been there. A few months after they'd sent me away, she'd asked our mother, point blank, why I never came home. Why I didn't even visit. And our mother had sat her down with that careful voice and said, "Charlotte chose to stay with Uncle Raymond. She's happier there. She doesn't really want to be part of our family, sweetheart. Some people are just like that. Don't take it personally." Whitney had believed it. She was 12, too. Why wouldn't she? "She made me think you didn't love us," Whitney said. And now she was crying. "For 20 years, I thought you'd pick them over me, that you'd abandon me. And the whole time, you were the one who got," she couldn't say it, "thrown away. The whole time, I was the one who got thrown away." And our mother had flipped the story so cleanly that even my own twin grew up believing I was the one who left. That's the part that still takes my breath. It wasn't enough to discard me. She'd had to rewrite me into the villain of my sister's childhood too, so that no one in that house would ever lie awake wondering if they'd done something wrong. I told Whitney to breathe. I told her none of it was her fault, that she'd been a child handed a lie by the one person she was supposed to trust. Then I asked her one more time, gently, what she was going to do at that dinner. There was a long pause. "I don't know yet," she said. "But I don't think I can keep saying their words anymore." It was enough. It was nearly enough. The morning of the dinner, I did my rounds like any other Saturday. A colic case at the Peterson place, a routine herd check, a barn cat with an abscess. The work studied me the way it always has. There's no performing for a sick animal. You either help it or you don't. By afternoon, I was home, laying the folder out on the bed one last time. I want to describe exactly what was in it because the contents mattered more than any speech. First, the notarized guardianship transfer with my father's handwritten reason facing up. That single line dismantled the lie that I'd chosen to leave. Second, the bank statements, the deposits, and then the withdrawals. My half of the fund draining into Whitney's tuition, dates circled. That showed they hadn't just let me go. They'd taken what was mine on the way out. Third, a certified letter from the bank confirming both beneficiaries. Fourth, a copy of Eleanor's letter in case I needed her voice in the room. I did not include anything cruel. No old grievances, no diary pages, no theater. Marisol had been clear. The documents are the weapon precisely because they aren't emotional. Let the facts be cold. Let them do the cutting. I practiced once more in front of the bathroom mirror, and I kept it to the few short lines I'd written. I didn't need a monologue. I needed 3 true things laid on a table in front of the people whose opinion my mother had spent her life curating. I dressed plainly, dark slacks, a sweater Diane had knitted me years ago because I wanted her there in some thread of wool. I tucked the folder into a plain bag. Sam kissed me at the door and held Eli, who waved a fistful of crayon at me. Mia hugged my legs and told me to be brave, which broke and rebuilt me in the same second. Then I got in my truck and drove the 10 minutes into town, toward the room where they thought they'd cornered me. I was almost to the restaurant when my phone buzzed in the cup holder. A family group text, one I'd been added to days earlier, probably so I'd feel the warmth of inclusion. All those cousins and aunts being a family again. I glanced at it at a red light. My mother had just sent a message and she'd sent it to the wrong thread. It was meant for my father or for Pam, but it landed in the big family group. All of us, including me. It read, "Once she signs Grandma's share over to Whitney tonight, we put all this behind us. Don't let her leave without the agreement. Be warm, but firm." I read it twice at that red light while my heart did something slow and final. There it was in my mother's own words sent to 30 relatives by accident. The whole loving reconciliation, the perspective, the fresh start. All of it reduced to a tactical instruction. Get the signature. Be warm but firm. I screenshotted it before she could delete it. Sure enough, a minute later, the message vanished from the thread. This message was deleted, followed by a flustered, "Sorry, wrong chat," and a little laughing emoji as if a joke had misfired. But you can't unend what 30 people already saw. And you definitely can't unend what I'd already saved. I sat at that green light until the car behind me honked. Then I pulled into the restaurant lot, parked, and turned off the engine. I looked at the screenshot one more time. My mother had just handed me the motive in writing, time-stamped, in front of the exact audience she'd spent decades performing for. The folder on the seat beside me had been a careful surgical thing. Now it had teeth. I sat there 1 full minute the way Sam had held me. Then I picked up the bag, walked across the gravel, and pushed open the door of the Hollowbrook room. I know some of you are sitting on a folder of your own. Proof of something nobody in your family wants you to say out loud. You don't have to shout it. You just have to set it on the table. Comment the word folder if you've ever had to do that. Let's stop being quiet about it. I have to back up one night because I left something out and it matters. The evening before the dinner after Whitney's call, I drove out to the farm to see Raymond. He's 80 now, slower, his hands knotted from 60 years of cold mornings and hard births. He still lives in the same house, though a hired man does most of the milking. I found him on the porch with a coffee, watching the light go down over the same pasture where I got married. I told him everything, the box, the fund, the dinner, the folder. He listened the way he always has without interrupting, turning his mug slowly in his hands. When I finished, he was quiet a long while. Then he said, "Your dad and I stopped talking the year he sent you to me. You know why I didn't? He called to ask if I'd take you like you were a here he couldn't carry through winter. And I said yes before he finished the sentence. Because the second he asked, I knew he'd already decided, and I'd be damned if you'd go to strangers." He looked at me. Best thing that ever happened to this farm was that man's worst day as a father. I had to look away at that. Then Raymond said the thing I carried into that room. Family isn't the people who can afford to keep you, Charlie. It's the people who never once did the math. He'd never said anything like it before. Raymond's not a talker, but he'd been saving that. Maybe for years, maybe for exactly this. I hugged him on that porch longer than either of us was comfortable with. Driving home in the dark, I understood that whatever the folder did to my parents the next night, I'd already won the only thing that ever mattered. I'd been kept, not by the people who made me, by the people who chose me. The folder was just for the record. The truth was already mine. So that's who walked into the Hollowbrook room. Not the difficult daughter. Not the girl who chose to leave. A 34-year-old woman who pulls calves at 3 in the morning, who'd been kept by people who never did the math, who had a screenshot in her pocket and a folder in her bag, and absolutely nothing left to prove to anyone except the one 12-year-old still living somewhere inside her ribs. The room was warm and low-lit, a long table set for 15 under a brass chandelier. The smell of garlic and bread. The clink of someone's ice water. They were all there. My mother at the head in pearls, mid-laugh performing host. My father beside her, gray and heavier than I remembered, working his jaw. Pam sharpied, already watching the door. A scatter of aunts and uncles and cousins. The audience, some of them shooting me the look you give someone you've decided to disapprove of. And at the far end, small and pale, Whitney. She met my eyes for 1 second and then looked at her plate. My mother saw me and lit up like a stage. Charlotte. Oh, honey, you came. She crossed the room and hugged me, and I let her, arms loose at my sides, the way you let weather happen. She smelled like the same perfume from 22 years ago. Over her shoulder, I could see the whole table watching, measuring, the script already running in their heads. The cold, ungrateful daughter finally come to be guilted into doing right by family. I let my mother seat me. I let the warmth roll over me. I put my bag on the floor by my chair, the folder inside it, and I rested my hand on the white tablecloth and waited. Because Raymond taught me something else too a long time ago in a barn at 3 in the morning. You don't rush a hard birth. You wait for the moment the body is ready. Then you pull once clean all the way through. Dinner came in courses, and so did the performance. My mother ran the table like a woman who'd waited decades for this audience. She toasted family found again. She told a soft edited story about how hard these years had been with Charlotte so far away, so hard to reach, shaping the room before she ever got near the ask. People nodded. Pam dabbed her eyes on cue. I ate my soup and said little, which they read as guilt. Exactly as planned. Then over the entree, my mother turned the warmth up and began to land it. You know, she said to the table, but really to me, Whitney's been through such a terrible time, the business, the divorce. And here we all are, blessed, especially some of us. A glance at me, gentle as a blade. I just think this is a chance for our family to take care of its own. Grandma Ella Laner, bless her, wasn't quite herself at the end. She made some decisions that weren't really fair to everyone, but we can fix that. As a family tonight. There it was, the turn toward the agreement. A cousin murmured approval. Pam said, "It's only right, loud enough to carry." My father set down his fork and looked at me with those flat eyes. "It's the decent thing, Charlotte. Share what you were given. Make it right." The whole table swung toward me. 15 faces, most of them already certain I'd refuse and prove I was exactly the cold creature Pam had described. My mother reached over and patted my hand. "We're not asking for much, honey, just for you to do right by your sister, to sign a little something tonight so we can all move forward." She had a paper. She actually had a paper folded by her plate and a pen. She'd brought her own document to my town, to my room. Certain I'd cave under the weight of all those eyes, I looked at the paper. Then I reached down for my bag, but I didn't open the bag yet. I wanted to hear her say it, all of it, out loud, in front of everyone. So I asked her calmly why she thought Eleanor's will was unfair. That was all the invitation she needed. My mother's face shifted into the wounded saint expression I remembered from childhood, and she addressed the table like a woman testifying. Because that girl, she said, and her voice caught with practiced emotion, left this family when she was young, she chose to. We tried, we begged, and she turned her back on us. And then when her grandmother was old and confused, she swept in and made sure she got everything while her own sister has nothing. I didn't want to say it like this, but this family deserves the truth. The truth. She said the word truth at my table to my witnesses 3 feet from the folder that held it. A few cousins shook their heads at me, and Aunt made a soft tisk. Pam folded her arms, satisfied, her campaign blooming exactly on schedule. My father nodded along, grim and righteous. And there it was, the exact moment I'd opened this whole story on. The restaurant gone quiet, my mother, having just told the table I'd abandoned the family and hoarded my grandmother's money. Whitney, too, thin at the end of the table, not looking up. My father's jaw working. This was the room. This was the moment. Everything since the night they put me in Raymond's truck had been the long road back to this table. I let the silence stretch 1 beat. 2. Let them all watch me. The cornered daughter, expecting tears or a tantrum or a check. Then I lifted the folder out of my bag and I set it down on the white tablecloth right next to my mother's wine glass. You're right, I said quietly. This family does deserve the truth. So, let's start with mine. I opened the folder and took out the first page. I didn't raise my voice. I've learned that the quieter you get, the harder people listen. This is a guardianship transfer, I said, and I slid it to the center of the table where the nearest cousins could see. Dated the spring I was 12. Signed by both my parents. It gives custody of me to Uncle Raymond. It is not temporary. There's a line on it for the reason. I looked at my father. Dad, would you like to read what you wrote, or should I move? So I read it slow and clear into the silence. Parents unable to allocate adequate resources to both minors. I let that sit. I didn't choose to leave, I said to the table to every face that had been told otherwise. I was 12 years old. My parents signed me over because they decided they could only afford 1 daughter in writing to a notary. An uncle picked up the page. His eyebrows climbed. He passed it down. My mother's smile had frozen into something brittle. That's taken out of context. She said we were struggling. You don't understand the pressure. I understand it perfectly. I said you explained it to Whitney. You told her I chose to stay away. That I didn't want to be part of this family. I turned to my sister. Whitney, did she tell you that? The whole table turned to Whitney. She'd gone white as the tablecloth, her hands gripping the edge. My mother shot her a look that could have stripped paint. A look I remembered, a look that used to end every argument in that house. But Whitney wasn't 12 anymore, either. And I could see in the way her chin came up that something 22 years in the making was about to give way. The guardianship paper made its way around the table hand to hand, and the room's certainty about me began quietly to come apart. I gave the room a moment, then took out the second set of pages. There's more, I said. This is the Ingram Children's Education Fund. Opened when Whitney and I were little. Both our names on it. Money from relatives, from a great-aunt, and most of all from Grandma Ella Laner, meant to put 2 girls through college. I laid the statements out, the deposits, then the withdrawals, dates circled in my own hand. These are the deposits, steady for years. And these, I moved my finger to the second column, are the withdrawals, starting the year after they sent me away. My half of this fund, the half with my name on the account, was emptied to the cent by the time I was 17. Every dollar of it went to Whitney's tutors, her private school, her college. My voice stayed level. I paid for vet school with a decade of loans eating beans, while there was money set aside for me that my parents spent on the daughter they kept. They didn't just give me away. I looked at my mother, then my father. You didn't lose me. You spent me. The room was dead silent. And then my father, God help him, did the thing that finished it. He couldn't stand to be accused without defending the logic he'd lived by. And he said, loud, indignant to the whole table, "We did what any responsible parent would do. You don't waste resources on a long shot. We can only invest in one future." It came out of him exactly the way it had come up through the heating vent when I was 11. Only now there were 15 witnesses and a guardianship paper going around the table and bank statements lined up on the cloth. He just confessed proudly to all of it in front of the only people whose good opinion he and my mother had ever cared about. An aunt put her hand over her mouth. A cousin set down the statement like it had burned her. My mother hissed his name. Too late. He'd authenticated everything I'd said in his own voice for free. That's when Pam tried to save the ship, because Pam has spent her whole life bailing my mother's boat. She stood halfway up. Voice shrill. "This is ridiculous. Charlotte, you've twisted everything. You came in here and poisoned your grandmother against her own son's family, and now you're hoarding the money and putting on a show. We all know what really happened." She looked around the table for her chorus. The cousin she'd spent 2 days seating. A few wavered, wanting to believe her because believing her was more comfortable than what was on the tablecloth. So I took out my phone. "Aunt Pam," I said, "you keep saying I came here in bad faith. Let me show everyone who came here in bad faith." I turned the screen to the table and read it aloud. My mother's own words from the group thread. "Once she signs Grandma's share over to Whitney tonight, we put all this behind us. Don't let her leave without the agreement. Be warm, but firm." I looked up. My mother sent that to all of us by accident an hour ago, then deleted it. This whole dinner wasn't a reconciliation. It was a plan to get my signature before the estate settles on Tuesday. Be warm, but firm. I passed the phone to the nearest cousin, who read it and went pale and passed it on. Pam's mouth opened and closed. The chorus she'd been counting on was now reading, in my mother's own words, exactly what they'd been recruited into. One of the cousins Pam had called 2 days ago looked at her and said quietly, "You told me she swept in for the money. That's not Pam. This says you all planned this." Pam had no answer. The whisper campaign she'd built collapsed under a single screenshot in front of the very people she'd whispered to. She sat back down hard, and at the far end of the table, slowly Whitney rose to her feet. Whitney stood there shaking, both hands flat on the table to hold herself up. Our mother said her name, low and warning, the voice that had ended every rebellion in that house for 30 years. "Whitney, sit down. This is not the time." But Whitney looked at her, and then she looked at me, and then she spoke to the whole table in a voice that cracked but did not stop. "When we were 12, she said, I asked Mom where Charlotte went, why she never came home, why she didn't even visit. She swallowed. Mom sat me down and told me that Charlotte chose to leave, that she was happier with Uncle Raymond, that she didn't want to be part of our family, that some people are just like that. And I shouldn't take it personally." Tears ran down her face, but her voice got stronger. "I believed her for 22 years. I believed my sister abandoned me. I grew up thinking Charlotte didn't love us." And the whole time she gestured at the papers on the table, the guardianship, the statements. The whole time they gave her away. They spent her college money on me, and they let me hate her for it so I'd never ask the hard questions. She turned to our mother. "You didn't just throw her out. You made me believe it was her fault. You stole my sister from me and told me she left." And our mother broke. The mask came all the way off. She shot up out of her chair, pearls trembling, and the careful host voice was gone, replaced by something raw and ugly that the whole table finally got to see. "After everything I sacrificed for this family," she shrieked. "I gave up my entire future. Do you have any idea what I gave up? You ungrateful, Both of you. I did what I had to do. She was screaming now, red-faced, spit flying, in front of the aunts and cousins she'd performed for her entire life. And I sat perfectly still, hands folded on the white cloth, and let them all watch the woman who'd called me cold finally show the room who'd been cold all along. When my mother finally ran out of breath, the room was so quiet you could hear the chandelier hum. I stood up then unhurried and I gathered my papers back into the folder one at a time. I didn't gloat. Raymond taught me you don't dance on a downed animal. I'm going to say this once and then I'm going to go home to my children. I said I'm not signing anything. Grandma Eleanor's will is valid. It was made with a clear mind and it's documented. On Tuesday, it settles to me. I looked at my father. The education fund is a separate matter. My lawyer has the records. What happens with that is going to be decided properly, not over dinner. You moved money out of an account with my name on it while I was a child. You may want to talk to your own attorney about that before you talk to me again. His face had gone the color of ash. He understood finally that the dinner he'd called to corner me had handed me leverage he couldn't undo. As for the rest of you, I said to the table gently, because most of them were just people who'd been told a story, you've been lied to for 22 years. I don't hold that against you. I hold it against the two people who told the lie. I picked up the folder. Mom, you spent my whole childhood managing what this family believed about me. Tonight, you can't manage it anymore. That's not my revenge. That's just what's left when the lie runs out. My mother sank back into her chair, smaller now. The pearls suddenly costumed jewelry. Pam stared at the table. The cousins wouldn't meet anyone's eyes. The performance was over, and everyone in that room knew which of us had been telling the truth. I tucked the folder under my arm. There was only one person left I wanted to speak to. I turned toward the end of the table toward my sister, still standing, still crying, finally free of the story too. Whitney and I stood looking at each other across the wreckage of that table. Two faces that used to be one. She was a mess. Running mascara, shaking hands, a 34-year-old woman who'd just lit her own shelter on fire by telling the truth in front of the people she still depended on. Part of me wanted to wrap her up and fix everything, the old over-responsible part. But I've learned that rescuing someone and respecting someone aren't the same thing. So I didn't offer her money. I didn't offer to make her my problem to solve. I took one of Marisol's cards out of my pocket. I'd brought it on purpose and I walked down the length of that table and put it in her hand. That's my lawyer, I said. Not for the estate. For you. If you need to get out of their basement and stand on your own feet. She knows people who can help you do it the right way. Whitney looked at the card, then at me. I'm so sorry, Charlie, she whispered. For all of it. I told her she didn't owe me an apology for being a child who got lied to. Then I said the thing I decided on the drive over, the boundary and the door, both at once. When you're ready to stand on your own, not on theirs, not on mine, call me as a sister. Not as a bank, not as a rescue, a sister. I'd like that, but I need you steady first. I've spent enough of my life being someone's overhead. I won't make you mine. She nodded, crying, clutching the card like the first solid thing she'd held in years. I squeezed her shoulder once, then I picked up my bag, said a quiet goodnight to the room full of stunned faces, and walked out of the Hollowbrook room into the cold, clean, dark of my own town. I didn't look back. I'd spent 22 years not being chosen. I was done waiting in that doorway. The estate settled that Tuesday, exactly as Eleanor had built it to. My parents' lawyer, once he heard about the bank statements and the guardianship paper, quietly withdrew the intent to contest. There was no court fight. The no contest clause did its work, and Grandma Eleanor's house and savings passed into my name, clean and final. Word of the dinner moved through the family the way these things do. The cousins Pam had recruited called me one by one, awkward and apologetic. An aunt sent a card. Pam herself went silent, and last I heard isn't welcome at most family gatherings anymore. Turns out a woman who will lie for her sister for 22 years runs out of credit eventually. My mother tried for a few weeks to keep the story alive. She posted a long weepy thing online about ungrateful children and how much she'd sacrificed. Almost no one engaged. The relatives who'd been in that room had seen the documents and heard my father announce his philosophy out loud. You can't whisper a story to people who've already watched the truth happen. The fund is its own slow road. Marisol is handling it properly on paper the way Eleanor would have wanted. It may come to something, or it may come to a settlement. Either way, it's being decided by law and not by guilt at a dinner table. I'm at peace with however it lands. The money was never really the point. The point was that there had been money with my name on it, and they'd spent it deciding I wasn't worth it. And now everyone knew. That knowing was the only restitution I'd ever actually needed. I drove home that night to a porch light Sam had left on and 2 kids asleep and a life no spreadsheet could touch. About a month later, a letter came from my parents' attorney. Formal, cold, a single page. My parents had updated their will, it said, and wished to inform me that I had been removed as a beneficiary of their estate. As if that were a punishment, as if there were anything left in that estate but the debts from Whitney's failed startup and a house they'd borrowed against twice. I read it standing at my mailbox, and I want to tell you exactly what I felt because it surprised me. Relief. They'd taken back something that had never really been mine. A place in a family that had only ever measured me. I signed the acknowledgement they'd enclosed without a flicker of hesitation. Some people would have been hurt by that letter. The 12-year-old in the truck might have been, but I wasn't 12 anymore, and I'd already inherited the only thing from that family that ever mattered. The certainty that I'd survived them and built something they couldn't ration. So, I let them cut me out. That was the trade, and I made it gladly. Peace in exchange for a place at a table I never wanted to sit at again. I mailed the form back the next morning, dropped it in the same blue box where Ella Laner's cards used to arrive, and drove to the clinic where a farmer was waiting with a sick here and absolutely no opinion about whether I was smart enough to be worth keeping. It was the best Monday I'd had in years. Whitney called in the spring, not for money. She'd used Marisol's referral, found work, moved out of the basement into a small place of her own 2 states away. I'm standing on my own feet, she said. You said to call when I was, so I'm calling. We talked for an hour. 2 sisters learning each other from scratch carefully like you'd approach an animal that's been hurt. It's not fixed. 22 years doesn't close in one phone call. But the door's open now on honesties. And we use it. She came out to the farm in June. Watched my kids tear across the same pasture where I got married, where Raymond first handed me a flashlight in a cold barn. She cried a little, the good kind. Ella Laner's old house is ours now, rented to a young family who keep chickens and wave when I drive by. Sometimes I park outside it and just look, and I thank the woman who spent her last years quietly building me a shield out of bank statements and love. She's the reason I never had to beg for a seat at my own family's table again. She gave me the one thing they never would. She gave me proof. And with it, peace. Here's what 22 years and one folder taught me. Family isn't the people who can afford to keep you. It's the people who never once did the math. If you've ever been told you were the one they could manage without the spare, the overhead, the long shot not worth the investment, you weren't. They were just bad at counting what mattered. Remember the folder? Remember the fund with my name on it? Remember the seat at the table they tried to make me beg for? Then go set the boundary you've been putting off with the person who keeps making you earn a love you were owed for free. You don't have to shout it. You just have to set it on the table. Share this with someone who needs to hear it tonight. Tell me your story in the comments and subscribe to Calm Drama Stories. I'll see you at the next table.